I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. And this is Currents. Immigration protesters say no to playing ball in Arizona next year.
What is happening in Arizona is beyond the immigrant issue. It's touching human rights.
'Tis the season for weddings. We go into the deep to discuss that with Bishop DiMarzio.
It's a natural institution. We see that it's been raised to the dignity of a sacrament by Christ himself.
And looking for some beach reading? We'll have some surprising suggestions.
There's one book that keeps coming up, though, on a number of lists, and it's a novel called Brooklyn.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. It codifies hate and creates an atmosphere of terror. The words of one priest in Arizona about his home state's controversial new immigration law. The Obama administration even took legal action, filing a lawsuit against the law. But many are taking their fight to the streets. With Major League Baseball's All-Star Game just days away, protesters in New York look to next year when the game is scheduled to take place in Arizona. As we hear now from producer Ingrid Rojas, activists are demanding that game be moved.
Sports and politics collide at a rally in front of MLB's offices in Midtown Manhattan. The rally, organized by the New York Immigration Coalition, was attended by approximately 200 people, including politicians, religious leaders, and community organizers.
Once again, let us continue to work together to make sure that we keep America at its best.
Even though what's happening in Arizona is atrocious and thousands of miles away, we still believe that the law is wrong.
The controversial Arizona law, which will take effect at the end of this month, gives police broad power to detain anyone suspected of being in the country illegally. And with the 2011 All-Star Games scheduled to take place in Phoenix, many community leaders, including some from the Catholic Church, saw this as an opportunity to add pressure against the law.
What is happening in Arizona is beyond the immigrant issue. It's touching human rights. We support immigration reform with all its due process, and we believe that this is against the Christian and Catholic tradition of loving our neighbor.
We disagree with the people that think that a person is here without the proper document, they are criminals, and we believe that this kind of law is basically discriminating and separating the families.
The Arizona law is discriminatory against Latinos and against all immigrants.
Congressman Jose Serrano is no stranger to baseball and politics. Yankee Stadium sits in his district. He introduced a resolution asking the MLB to move the game out of Arizona. Congressman Serrano argues that with this law, MLB's Latino players and their families could be subjected to racial profiling. Almost 30% of the league is comprised of Latino players.
The national pastime, the most important sport that we have in this country, cannot play its game in such a horrible place as Arizona under these conditions.
We feel that it put at risk the baseball players, the very people who work at the stadium, and the very fans, whether they live in Arizona or they will be visiting Arizona, because it will potentially lead to the arrest of folks who may look like or may act like being undocumented workers. So that means that it's targeting a population, and we've seen that's wrong.
But not everybody agrees.
I think they're misrepresenting what the Arizona law is really trying to do. They say it's a racist law. That's not true. Racial profiling is strictly prohibited within the language of the Arizona law.
I think Arizona has the right to defend its borders, and the federal government is not doing enough.
And despite the strong opposition from religious leaders, national politicians, and even the executive director of the MLB's Players Association, Commissioner Bud Selig of the MLB remains unmoved. Still, the NFL yanked Super Bowl 27 away from Arizona when they refused to observe the Martin Luther King holiday. So what are the chances that the All-Star Game will be moved?
Oh, I think the chances are very high the game will still be in Arizona. I would give you a 99% guarantee. Just for me personally, what I think is going to happen. Baseball doesn't like to get involved in politics too much. It's just one of those things. This is a political decision. When the NFL yanked the Super Bowl, 49 other states already had the holiday observed. Most of America agreed that, that should be a holiday. Here, it's too touchy right now, I think. And, the law could change by next year anyway, and they'd have egg on their face.
Well, so far, Major League Baseball Commissioner Bud Selig's response has been to cite baseball's track record in minority communities and its role in sparking the civil rights movement.
Well, stay tuned. There's more current straight ahead when we return. The day's headlines including the Catholic Health Association backing another controversial decision by President Obama. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, are you having trouble deciding what book to take with you to the beach? Well, we will have some suggestions.
But first, let's look at the day's headlines. Pope Benedict today named a new leader for the troubled religious order, the Legionaries of Christ. As we hear from Rome reports, the appointee currently leads the Vatican's financial office.
The Legion of Christ finally knows the name of the papal delegate who will help resolve problems caused by the double life of the congregation's founder, Marcial Maciel. Italian Archbishop Vallasio de Paolis is the papal delegate. The 74-year-old de Paolis currently presides over the Prefecture for Economic Affairs of the Holy See and is a professor of canon law at the Gregorian University of Rome. 2 vice delegates will help de Paolis, one English-speaking and the other Spanish-speaking. The vice delegates have not been named yet. The Pope decided to name a delegate supervisor to the Legion because of its current director's failure to resolve the congregation's problems. 5 bishops interviewed more than 1,000 members, went to almost all the religious houses, and visited a number of projects the congregation manages in order to make this decision. The key to the Holy See's intervention in the Legion of Christ will be marked by the future of its current leadership. No one can deny that the superiors of the congregation of the Legion of Christ were heirs to Maciel and were heirs of the system of power within the congregation that the Holy See has denounced. Some of these superiors were complicit with that structure. The Vatican denounced Marcial Maciel as the result of its first investigation, calling his conduct gravely serious, objectively moral, and revealing a life devoid of scruples and true religious sentiment. The bishops also denounced defense mechanisms built around the founder that prevented recognition of his double life. The Vatican asked the order to redefine the charism of the Legion of Christ while preserving its true nucleus. It also urged the congregation to review the exercise of authority and to defend the enthusiasm of youth's faith that could have disappeared after seeing the founder's double life. They've all had to talk with their families, their benefactors, and with their pastors and their ministries. Everyone had to explain not only what happened, but also what we feel and what we want to do. This has been a period of suffering, but at the same time, there has been a period of growth and purification. The legionaries publicly declared that Marcial Maciel was not a model of the life of Christ or priesthood within weeks of the Vatican publishing its findings. The congregation also denounced the double life and sexual abuses Marcial Maciel committed and expressed dismay at what had happened. The legionaries also apologized to all the victims for not having believed them and said they welcome the provisions in obedience to the Pope.
When the Vatican issues new rules for the handling of clergy sex abuse cases in the coming weeks, reports say the church will address another hot-button issue, the ordination of women. Vatican sources told Catholic News Service the new guidelines would include the attempted ordination of women among the list of most serious crimes against church law. With regard to sex abuse, the rules are expected to extend the statute of limitations and deal more harshly with priests who download child pornography from the internet. CNS reports the revisions will be published in mid-July. A federal judge in Massachusetts ruled part of the Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional Thursday in a case that could affect marriage laws all across the country. Judge Joseph Taro ruled the law interfered with the state's right to define marriage. He also ruled the ban on providing federal pension benefits to same-sex partners violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. President Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act into law in 1996. Meantime, members of the Presbyterian Church USA struck down a proposal to recognize same-sex marriages, but delegates to the denomination's convention approved allowing non-celibate gays in committed relationships to serve as clergy. The Presbyterian Church USA is the largest Presbyterian denomination in the country, with nearly 3 million members. A new report shows Catholics across the world stepped up in a big way to help the people of Haiti following the massive earthquake earlier this year. In the 6 months following the quake, Catholic relief efforts through Caritas International helped 2.3 million people at a cost of nearly $47 million. Caritas says the money has gone toward providing food, water, shelter, health care, sanitation, counseling, and protection to Haitians since more than 230,000 people were killed in the disaster on January 12th.
President Obama appointed Harvard pediatrician Dr. Donald Berwick to a prominent health care post this week, and the Catholic Health Association is praising the move. Obama came under fire for appointing Berwick to head the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services while the Senate was in recess. The head of the Catholic Health Association said, though, that Berwick is needed to work on the implementation of certain aspects of the new health care law. U.S. bishops criticized the CHA earlier this year for supporting health care reform despite the bishops' concerns over abortion funding. Well, some Jewish groups have been critical of the Catholic Church for moving Pope Pius XII along the path to sainthood, saying the late pontiff did not do enough to stop the Holocaust. But a researcher says he found possible evidence Pius helped 200,000 Jews escape Nazi Germany in 1939. Reports say Dr. Michael Hessman of the Pave the Way Foundation discovered a letter written by Pius in the Vatican archives. That letter urging bishops to apply for visas for non-Aryan Catholics and Jewish converts who wanted to leave Germany. Hessman says other evidence shows that the visas would have been given to ordinary Jews to help them escape oppression. And finally, the Catholic Fellowship turns 2 years old today. The New York-based organization hosts regular events in the Diocese of Brooklyn and throughout the New York metro area. More than 10,000 people are members of the Catholic Fellowship, and you've seen many of them right here on Currents. They'll be celebrating their anniversary this weekend with a summer fair and barbecue, along with an installation mass for a new chapter of the group on Long Island.
Really a great fun way to reach out to younger Catholics in the area.
That's right. They do a good job of it, too.
Stay tuned. There's more Currents coming up. Just ahead, it seems like everyone's tying the knot this time of year. We sit down to discuss that with Bishop DiMarzio.
You learn to talk. You learn to share the important things. It doesn't come natural, especially for men.
Welcome back. Well, summertime is a big time for weddings. About a third of all weddings actually happen in June, July, or August, which I did not know. I knew June was popular. According to the National Association of Wedding Ministers, the average cost of a wedding is $22,000. No small change there. The most popular place for weddings is kind of a surprise to me, Las Vegas, actually. And about 80% of weddings take place in a church or a synagogue.
I remember a time not all that long ago when I didn't even make $22,000 in an entire year. But of course, sometimes planning for a wedding can actually overshadow what's really going on. That's a marriage. And that's just part of what I discussed recently with Bishop DiMarzio when the two of us went into the deep on the subject of weddings and marriage. Well, Bishop DiMarzio, thanks so much for being here once again. We appreciate your time.
Okay, good to be with you.
Well, it seems like, just not all that long ago we were saying, 'tis the season to be jolly and all that. Well, now it's 'tis the season for weddings. It's getting to be the warm time of the year. Weather's nice and all that. So talk to us just a little bit about the importance of the sacrament of marriage.
Well, truly, it is a sacrament. I think that's the first thing that we have to understand. Although it's a natural institution, we see that it's been raised to the dignity of a sacrament by Christ himself, and that it is something that we want to celebrate within the sacramental system of the church, because the sacraments give us grace. They give us help to live that state in life, or ordination or marriage. So that's why it is so important.
Well, of course, and this is a very familiar statistic to everybody, that 50% of marriages end in divorce, unfortunately. Why do you think that is? Why do you think marriage has become kind of a neglected thing?
Well, I think it's partly the culture in which we live, where everything is temporary, and commitments, lifelong commitments, are very difficult for people to make. That's part of it. I think the lessening of the idea of a lifelong commitment also undercuts the sacrament of marriage, lowering moral standards where immorality outside of marriage just seems to be ordinary. It doesn't help. So all of these things have really impacted the marriage as an institution. People not getting married, living together, it's becoming so common. So all of these things have taken effect on, I think, the sacrament of marriage.
Now, you've been a priest for 40 years. We just celebrated your anniversary of the priesthood here on Currents not all that long ago. I'm sure you've done a lot of weddings during that time.
That's true.
When you sit down with a couple, with a man and a woman who are about to say their I do's and make that commitment before God and everyone else, what do you say to them? What advice do you have for young couples out there?
Well, basically, I think marriage is a union of persons. It's a communication. And that's where marriages stand and fall, on the communication between husband and wife. They need to know one another. They need to be able to share their deepest thoughts and feelings with one another. That's the way a marriage really can perdure through time with all the difficulties that people face. I am very much a proponent of the marriage encounter movement, where people learn the skills of communication in marriage, and it's a skill. You learn to talk, you learn to share the important things. It doesn't come naturally, especially for men. Men just don't like to talk, and women like to talk too much sometimes. So you've got a difference between the male and the female, and being able to communicate the important things really has the core of a success in marriage, really.
Yeah. And my parents have been married for about 40 years now, so I always, I look up to them so much for that, and just say, my goodness, the commitment that they've made for their lifetime. Sure. We did a story not all that long ago about a lot of couples who gathered at a local parish who were celebrating anniversaries of all different lengths. I mean, you had some people who'd been married for 60 plus years and others. Is there one thing maybe that you would say is, I don't know if it's maybe such a big secret, but maybe the secret to a long, successful marriage? I know you mentioned communication. Any others too?
Well, I think consideration of the others. You have to communicate, but also you have to be willing to suffer a bit and to say you're sorry. 40 years ago, there was a great book that became a movie, Love Story, a great actress in there, and there was a line in there, and I repeat it a lot. It probably is the most ill-conceived line, but it said, to love means you never have to say you're sorry.
Right.
It's exactly the opposite. You have to say, if you love somebody, you're not perfect, you're going to hurt, you have to say you're sorry. And that's one of the other key elements, I think, in marriage, of forgiveness. Yeah. It's so much part of what makes a good marriage, that people are able to forgive one another when they hurt one another, even inadvertently. That's really important. Otherwise people remember things for years and years, and it just makes a relationship deteriorate.
Yeah, sits there and grows and festers and only gets worse. All right, well, Bishop DiMarzio, thank you so much here for joining us once again on Currents. We appreciate it.
Okay, good to be with you.
Well, the wedding is just the starting line. I think that's kind of the major theme riding through all of this discussion, because people plan so much and look forward so much to that wedding day. What comes after is the more important thing, the lifelong commitment that two people make to one another, and that's something to bear in mind. And as the bishop just said there, it may not always be the most pleasant experience in the world. You might have to say you're sorry. You might have to go through some difficult times, but you have to be prepared for it.
Most certainly, and I think a lot of people really aren't, because they don't really know themselves very well, and if they don't, then they're not necessarily that willing to get to know themselves through the course of the marriage and do the things that the bishop talked about, like saying they're sorry and being considerate and asking the other person about things that they may not know about the other person, and then be willing to work through that and push through that. And that really is a difficult and challenging thing to do, even with friendships or familial relationships, but it's really important in a marriage relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a difficult thing to do sometimes, to get to know yourself well enough to then allow somebody else to get to know you as well. But it's got to be done, especially, as you said, in that kind of relationship.
Stay with us. We have much more straight ahead. When we return, people talk about the good book, but there's also other things worth taking a look at. We'll get some recommendations for summer reading.
It's about an Irish immigrant girl who comes to Brooklyn, and she comes here with the help of a Brooklyn diocesan priest.
Finally tonight, if you're looking for a little summer reading, maybe something you want to take to the beach with you if you have a vacation planned, we might have a few ideas for you.
Yeah, recently the Tablet published its annual summer book list, what people around the diocese are reading over their vacation. Our Natalia Ortiz sat down recently with Tablet editor Ed Wilkinson to get his read on what to read.
Ed Wilkinson here from the Tablet. Thank you so much for joining us.
Natalia, nice to be with you. It's
Thank
good
you.
to be inside and cool.
Yes,
you know?
it sure is. Tell me about it. So tell us about the summer reading list that you actually featured in the Tablet. And what are some of the trends that you've noticed around about the books people are reading?
Well, this is something we started about 10 years ago. We used to have a book review column by Monsignor Charles Davini, who was a very renowned, venerable older professor, and he's since passed away. But he used to, he started this actually about 10 years ago. He said, "Suppose I do a column on what people are going to be reading this summer." I said, "That's a good idea, Monsignor." You know, and it was an interesting enough idea, so that when he passed away, we continued the tradition, and we just send out a form to people in the diocese, and we ask them, "What are you planning to read this summer?" And you know, we ask priests, we ask pastors, we ask teachers, we ask just some people in the secular media. So we try to get a cross section of people, and it's very interesting, the responses. You know, the responses are all over the place. There's only maybe 1 or 2 books that are repeated on anybody's lists. You know.
Really?
So, yeah.
So how do you? Who's lucky enough to be featured in the article? Because I'm sure you get a lot of responses. Is there a way you go about choosing who you want to print?
Actually, there is. For instance, we found out over the years that there are certain priests in the diocese who are voracious readers. You know, I never would have known this except that, and we found out that some priests are moderators of book clubs, and they're always reading. They like to read. So there are certain people that I always make sure I hit, you know, and then I ask them, you know, what are you reading? Because I know that they're up on the latest books. And then people that I just come across, like Larry Salona is a reporter for the New York Post, and we did something with him one day, and I just said to him, "Hey, what are you reading for the summer?" And he gave me a couple of titles, so we got him in there. You know.
So do we think that they're actually reading all of these books, or
well, we're thinking,
or are they maybe thinking of reading them and don't get around to them? What do you think?
Somebody suggested that we do a fall feature about the books. I actually did read this.
I mean, they could come on and talk to us about them, right?
There was actually there was one person who said to me, "I cheated a little bit because I've actually read a couple of these books already, but I just wanted to give them a little plug." You know?
I see.
And there's one book that keeps coming up though on a number of lists, and it's a novel called Brooklyn. And
which you brought with you today?
I brought with, yeah. And I read it myself, and I actually had not heard about it, but apparently it's a pretty popular book, and it's making the rounds. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. Yeah. And it's about an Irish immigrant girl who comes to Brooklyn, and she comes here with the help of a Brooklyn diocesan priest. And there's a lot of, you would say it's a Catholic novel, I think, because it revolves around a Brooklyn parish and the help that the parish is to the girl. And she comes to a point in her life where she has to make a decision. It's a love story. It's a very nice story. And she gets to a point where she has to decide which way she's going to go with her life. And it's really a very, very, I was really intrigued by the book, and I loved it. I really loved it.
Brooklyn, it's called just like that, very simply, Brooklyn. Colm Toibin, is that how you say the author's name?
Yeah, he's an Irish author, and it's very, very good. And you know, I could read anything that's about Brooklyn or New York City, but especially if it's Brooklyn, I'll read it. You know?
And very close to home for all of our viewers, hopefully.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good local color because it mentions street names that you could, you know, you say, "Oh, I know where that is," and the girl gets a job on Fulton Street in a department store, so you can see all these things in your mind. So it's a nice, easy read, and if somebody's going to the beach or going to the mountains and wants to sit around, It's only about 250 pages. It's a great book.
Okay, so the book list isn't limited, what I noticed, to theological books. It's also widespread.
Yeah.
But I did notice, I mean, one of them, Monsignor Sean Ogle, says he's reading Many Are Called, Rediscovering the Glory of the Priesthood by Scott Hahn. So is that, you think, in line with the culmination of the Year for Priests, or?
Well, you know, I think Scott Hahn is a very popular author, and I think he rings true with a lot of the priests and the people in the diocese. So he's written a lot of books, and when they see a new title come out by him, they gravitate to it. Monsignor Ogle is one of these guys who taught English at Cathedral Prep, and I knew that, and he does a lot of, he keeps up with what the theological thought is, contemporary thought is, and he reads all. I'm sure that he reads all those books that are on there.
He's one of the ones you're pretty certain is actually telling the truth.
Right. Father Jim Cunningham is another guy.
Okay.
There's another guy. Monsignor Fernando Ferrarese. There's another pastor. I know these guys are reading all of those books that are on there. So I feel very comfortable in putting down their choices.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Ed. We appreciate it, and we hope that we can maybe meet with you again very soon.
It's my pleasure. Always nice to be with you.
Voracious readers.
I know, you learn something new every day. I didn't know that, as Ed was saying there, that Monsignor Sean Ogle, a big reader, Monsignor Fernando Ferrarese, also a big reader there. So a couple of guys to keep up with too, if you're looking for something to read, maybe you run across him just as you're out of the diocese, say, hey, what are you reading? What can I read? But yeah, I mean, some great titles there, and especially when you're talking about a book that is about the place where you live or where you work or where you do a lot of your business, and you're able to get that visualization. That's a really cool thing. And
then, of course, there's always the good book that
yes.
you can bring along.
That's right. That's right. The #1 bestseller of all time.
That's
right there.
All right, well, that is it for tonight. Remember, you can always catch us online at currentsny.net, and you can also check out our Facebook page as well. And if you have an idea for a story, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you just want to get in touch and give us some feedback, you can always drop us a line, and our email address is just that. It is dropusaline@currentsny.net. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night and a great weekend.